Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Institute for Government. I'm Jill Rutter. I'm Programme Director here and part of the team that's doing our Making the Games project, which is looking at what were the factors behind the success of London 2012, which, as you'll have realised, we were particularly well placed to observe from the Institute for Government because we were right on the finish line for various key events. Actually, we couldn't see anything from here at all, but we could hear lots of practices of the opening ceremonies, part of the excellent staging that LOCOG did. This is the second of our series in Making the Games events. So our first one, we had two of the members of the Government Olympic Executive giving their view on what made the Games work. But this time, and this probably should have been our first event, but the GOE was sort of disappearing out of the door before we did anything, so we had to get them in early. This is going back to the start and looking at actually why did we go for the Games? What was the vision for London 2012? Why did Ken Livingstone bring London in? Why did the DCMS decide to go and bid for this, persuade the Prime Minister that it's worth investing political capital in? And how did the people in charge of putting the bid together and the bid company and then into the London Organising Committee for the Olympic Games, how did they actually create sustained interest in what went from being a bid into what we all saw in July and August and in September this year? So our panel probably doesn't need that much introduction. You will have noticed that Tessa Jowell, who basically has been the Olympics minister from before we won the bid, when she was Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport in 2001, became the Minister for the Olympics on the day London was awarded the bid, kept that post both in DCMS and then in the Cabinet Office until the 2010 election, and then moved seamlessly over to shadow that brief in opposition. Tessa Jowell will join us as soon as she's dealt with the inconvenience of voting in the House of Commons. Ken Livingstone, London's first Mayor of London. Quite interesting that actually without a mayor, some people have told us we wouldn't have got the Games, we wouldn't have sort of chance to get the Games, so quite interesting to get that perspective. Ken Livingstone, Mayor of London from 2000 to 2008. And Jackie Brock-Doyle. And Jackie, I think, is probably the biggest continual survivor here. Jackie been Director of Communication and Public Affairs at the London Organising Committee for the Olympic and Paralympic Games since November 2005. But before that, she worked in the bid company. Before that, she worked on the 2002 Commonwealth Games. And before that was in Sydney for the 2000 Olympic Games. I hope all that's right. So she's a real Games veteran, tell you how London's stacked up. So Jackie, aged 21, as in child, whatever. So I was wondering whether to ask Ken or Tessa to start, but that's actually sort of solved itself. Because I'm going to give the floor instantly.
For the filming, do you want me standing up or sitting down?
Whichever you prefer.
I'll stand up then. The Olympics organisation, the British Olympic Association, came to me about 5 or 6 months after I'd been elected mayor, when there were a lot more pressing problems on my mind, like creating administration, the congestion charge, to say that they had been told by the International Olympic Committee that submitting bids for Birmingham and Manchester was hopeless. You needed to have a city the size of London. In fact, it was the Israeli delegate on the IOC who put it quite bluntly: if you want to be a serious bid, you've got to come back with London. And so they commissioned a major study about the technical feasibility of London. They turned up at my office and said, we need an hour to present this. And they started, broadly they'd examined 2 sites to create a Games around Wembley or one in the Docklands. And after about 6 or 7 minutes and droning on, I said, stop, I've heard all this before. Because in the late 1970s, the Tory-controlled GLC under Horace Cutler commissioned an identical study examining the benefits of either Wembley or Docklands. And even then, Wembley had been ruled out because the only available site for the Olympic athletes' residences would have meant concreting over a major local park and then demolishing it afterwards with no real housing legacy. And so the whole legacy, even in 1980, when the GLC debated whether or not to bid, rested on a Docklands development. And the site they looked at wasn't Stratford, it had been the Royal Docks, where development has been proceeding for some years now, but their idea was this would immediately transform the docks, which had been closed for over a decade. And Horace Cutler trundled off to see Mrs. Thatcher then barely a year in office, said, look, we'd like to bid for the Olympic Games. I need 2 commitments from you. One is to extend the Jubilee line into the Royal Docks so that people can access it. And the other is to establish a national lottery so we can raise the funds for it. And she said, we've been elected to cut spending, we're not extending the Jubilee line, and I'm morally opposed to a lottery, so bugger off. And that was the end of that. Had she said yes, we would have won. The only other serious bidder for the 1988 Games was South Korea, a military dictatorship, and the IOC were deeply unhappy about the risks that went with that. So had Mrs Thatcher had a more of a sense of vision, the question of London bidding for 2012 would not have arisen. We've been too close to our last bid. So I took an immediate decision saying yes. The odds were very long at that stage, but I knew even to mount a credible bid, government would have to invest and commit to investing quite a bit in terms of upgrading the transport infrastructure, extending the DLR and so on. And broadly, there's nothing much to be lost in throwing your oar into all of this. There was then virtually no progress from that meeting for a year because the Department of Culture, Media and Sport was being led by Chris Smith and Kate Hoey. Kate Hoey was already publicly committed to the 2012 Games going to Paris for some bizarre reason. Don't ask me why. You should get her here to justify that. And Chris Smith was struggling with the disaster, one of Labour's many forgotten disasters now from that first term, of having bid to stage the international athletics and promising the International Athletics Federation they'd build a new stadium at Pickett Slot where it would take place, and then forgetting to build the stadium, and so going through humiliation of asking the International Athletics Federation could they please put it on somewhere else. And at that stage people thought, there's really no chance. But there was a complete clear out at Department of Culture, Media and Sport. After the 2001 election, Tessa Jowell came in and was immediately in favour of this and started the long, slow slog of persuading deeply sceptical colleagues about all of this. And because of the growing focus on the build-up to the war in Iraq, the government put off the decision until what seemed like the successful invasion of Iraq had been concluded by late spring 2003, was it? I can't remember. No, yes, 2002 or 3, I can't remember. But whenever it was. Left us about 10 weeks to get in the first preliminary bid, which was a bit of a mad rush. And of course, London was accepted for the long list. We then had really only a year to put together a realistic and credible bid. And we were looking for someone high profile to do that. Almost no one capable of doing something like putting together a bid for a massive development project is available at the drop of a hat. But fortunately, Barbara Cassani, who got one of the budget airlines off and running with remarkable skill, had just left that and was planning to write a book about it, and so she was able to start immediately. And Barbara Cassani was absolutely focused, and to everyone's amazement, managed to get together as credible a bid as you could possibly have done in those circumstances. And also had a remarkable degree of integrity, because having got the International Olympic Committee to put us on the final shortlist of the 5, she then honestly turned around to me and Tess and said, look, she didn't put it quite as boldly as that. I'm quite good at putting together a project like this. I can't face the prospect of the next few years lobbying the pretty dull and uninteresting members of the International Olympic Committee. And so she stepped aside, and we got Seb Coe, who can charm anybody. And so we owe Barbara Cassani a lot, both for putting a bid together, but also being one of the few people in public life to recognise you don't have the skills to carry on. Most people have carried on and gone down to defeat, but she did. Then Tessa and I had, I should also say another thing that we had to overcome, of course, the opposition of Gordon Brown, who loathed and detested everything about London, not just me. And just before the Cabinet had to make the final decision on whether or not to bid, come up with this, we opened the papers to see a sort of anonymous briefing from the Treasury saying that it can't be done unless London pays for it. But Tessa and I met about 48 hours after this, and she said, can London make a contribution? I said yes. It was literally that quick a conversation. And then our officers went and spent a couple of weeks negotiating the infamous walnut whip strategy, that it would cost the council taxpayer no more than 38 pence a week, which was the time. It cost the walnut whip at the time. And we came up with the walnut because on the day I had to go and justify this London Assembly, I popped into the local news agency looking what on earth was there that cost just 38 pence, which was the commitment. The only bloody thing was this walnut whip. And this has dogged us all the way through the following decade of people paying. But I have to say that through all the ups and downs of the funding, government never came back to us and asked us to increase the commitment from the council taxpayer, because it would have been difficult to say the least. Broadly, it was just a huge and relentless lobbying exercise. But I got what I wanted, which was £2.9 billion of extra investment in transport. And Gordon Brown allowed us to go to the bond markets to raise this money, and a transformation of the East End of London. That area had been neglected ever since the docks closed. I think there was an assumption, whichever party was in government, that people could just go and get a job somewhere else in London. And it just doesn't work like that, particularly given how expensive the fares can often be to get around London. And so there was no way any mayor would have been able to persuade any government to invest £8 billion in one part of London. But with the sword of Damocles of 2012 hanging over their heads, they had no bloody choice. And so the money flowed in. And it is a stunning transformation. Most people never went into that area. And still today, most people have never been into the area south of the Olympic site down to the Thames. And that is the real legacy. It's very nice to have the stadium and the aquatic centre and a nice new park and the housing that will come. But in a sense, the Olympic site and the associated developments we're now going to get out of the legacy are just the small part of what is to come. Having won the bid in 2005, I went and saw Yvette Cooper to say, look, we would be mad to put in the infrastructure in terms of sewage and power and transport for the Olympic Games and then come back in 20 years to have to dig it all up to expand it for the development of the land to the south. The land to the south has the capacity to create 50,000 new jobs and 40,000 new homes, much more significant than the Olympic Park itself. And to give the government its credit, which I often didn't much of that period, they did make that decision, which was one of the major factors in the increase in cost. So the legacy now really comes down to what the government and the mayors will do in the years to come to actually sell that site around the rest of the world and continue the impact of development and job creation and new housing. And just finally, I have to say, because given this started in 2000, and I was there on 2 or 3 occasions during the games themselves, going in and walking around the site, and with the exception of Boris's vast metallic erection, it's virtually exactly as we all planned, and very few things over such a span of time turn out like that. But when Craig Reedy came to see me back in 2000, I immediately saw the possibility of this vast investment in infrastructure, however long the odds. And I got exactly what I wanted, and it has turned out, although more expensive than we originally hoped, has turned out it is there. It will transform the East End and keep transforming it for decades to come. What Craig Reedy wanted was to say, and he said to the OC, we will give you the best games you've ever had. They were a great city to hold the games in, the people are friendly, it's relaxed. It will be a games you never forget. And as I watched him putting the gold medal over Jessica Ennis, and he was as pleased as punch, I knew in exactly the same way I got everything I wanted out of that bid. The British Olympic Association got everything they wanted, a legacy of the games which I think will be, every other games will be judged against for decades to come.
So with absolutely immaculate timing,
I was going drone on to UK.
Coming in for the final lap, the baton passes to
Right.
Tessa Jowell.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, I've just come from Corby, so where there is a by-election. So I'm very sorry to be just a little bit late, and I'm now just going to fumble my way to the notes that I made on the train in the hope that I can answer the 3 questions that were put to me. The first is, what's the role of the Olympics Minister? The second is developing a vision for the Games. And the third was managing the impact of a general election. And let me just sort of begin by the role of the Olympic Minister, because when we started on this 10-year journey, I was Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. Ken was the Mayor of London. And so there wasn't, any Olympic entity in government, very far from it. There was an allergy to undertaking a large project right across government. And so we began to develop the capacity and capability to make a decent fist of a bid. But the real increase in capacity and capability came both as we got close to the decision in Singapore, and then obviously accelerated very fast after that. And certainly when we established what became known as the Government Olympic Executive, it was my aim that this become a small unit in government, lean, focused, with the very best people. And I can see some of the very best people here in the audience tonight, and no doubt they'll make a contribution when we get into discussion. So the first thing was, we started from nowhere, but it was very, very important to build cross-government capability at the point at which we'd won the bid, and we were full steam on this. And one of the very early things we had to do, therefore, was to design the governance structure. And those of you who may be students of this, if you're students of this and you've actually looked at the governance structure, I suggest you take a holiday, because you wouldn't recommend it to any functional organisation. But one of the really important lessons that we had to, or the facts that we had to live with, was that your freedom of manoeuvre, given that the International Olympic Committee own the Games, the host city contract is signed by the mayor, and government has to fit in within that space. And these are relationships that it is very important to respect. So we did underpin the cross-government work with a cabinet committee, but we also set up, if you like, a super strategic body, the Olympic Board, which was not, it wasn't as grandiose in its functions as the description suggests, but it was the forum that brought everybody together. And I can say more about that. In discussion. I think the other thing that was incredibly important throughout this whole process, and was a prior requisite to the answers to the other 2 questions, was that this was, to use a very clunky term, a highly relational project. It did bring together a small group of people who were absolutely passionate about this, and who trusted each other, who developed enormous loyalty to each other, and in the words of Harry Truman, were less bothered about who got the credit. And nothing can overstate the importance of that. And that small group of people pretty much stayed together. Ken was always a kind of godfather to the project, even after the London electors unwisely voted him out as mayor. But the important thing was that there was a group of people from, as I say, highly disparate backgrounds, for which the possibility of realising the potential of this was imprinted right through it. And I think that the second point which relates to that is that it was highly relational, with the highest degree of loyalty to the project. But I think that's also one of the reasons why values were kind of stamped right through the project. And it was, right from the outset, a very value-driven project. So it wasn't by accident that we had 3.5 times the construction industry average in terms of recruiting apprentices. It wasn't by chance that disabled people were so heavily represented, both in LOCOG, which Jackie will talk about, and also in the Olympic Delivery Authority. There was a sense, and that was part of this shared belief by this small group of people, that this could make this country a better place, and in all sorts of ways. And so that's, in a way, I sometimes felt we were a bit like sort of secret sorcerers, cooking something, and being guardians of an extraordinary secret, because we all, I think, shared a view of what would happen, but nobody else quite did. And I remember going to the cabinet time after time and doing an Olympic presentation and just saying, you have to be prepared for what this is going to do to our country and how extraordinary this is going to be, and the British people right out there in front. And they did, as several of them have said to me subsequently, they did kind of look with a benign indulgence at this slightly Mooney-like prediction. But anyway, that's what it was. Oops, I'm so sorry. So the next question is developing the vision for the Games and managing competing objectives. Because I had worked very closely on the sort of recovery of big projects that had failed, I felt I'd learnt a lot about how these things go wrong. And I have to say that if you do something on this scale and it's going to go wrong, it goes wrong. You lay the ground for its failure in the first couple of years. And if you get that wrong, then you can never quite recover. And it's always as if you're trying, having to accommodate an inherent weakness. So what were the risks? Well, the risks were that the public would turn against it. The risks were that the headline writers' predictions would come true, and there are sort of three of them. One is that the budget is out of control and the taxpayer is going to have to pay even more, number one. Number two, the venues are all late and the IOC are holding crisis meetings. And the third is that all the people involved in this are completely useless and should be sacked. And you just have to kind of live with that ambient noise and get on with it, under that radar. But what I was very clear about was that this had to be the UK's Games in London. And therefore, we did commission an economic impact assessment, which showed that the impact on London, or the growth in London's economy, would be about 5.9 billion, but 4.4 billion of that would be displacement from other regions of the country. And that's why, Jackie and all the leadership of LOCOG, with me, with the Olympic Delivery Authority and GOE, obviously the GLA and the Mayor were focused on London, were absolutely dedicated to taking the message out around the country. And one of the real unsung successes of the Olympics, I think, was the Nations and Regions programme, which set fire to the torch relay. And it would not, sorry about that. Okay, keep going, you think. But the torch relay would not, 13 million people came out to greet the Olympic torch, and including my 93-year-old mother, who had not left home for 6 months before that. And was that, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Anyway, and that wouldn't have happened but for nations and regions, and our determination, our shared determination, that while LOCOG, with meticulous care, would plan the route, it would be for communities to own the nature of the celebration. And that was, what was made, one of the many things that made it as extraordinary as it did. So making sure that we did not bow to the inevitabilities. And one of the most important inevitabilities was A, that all the economic benefit would come to London, and B, all the contracts would come to London. And that was why John Armitt and I went all around the country selling what was called the Compete For network, which was an electronic dating system for businesses of all sizes that wanted to bid for the Olympics. And that in turn was why we were able to tell a story about the Olympic Park, which we've done so many times, about the steel from Bolton and the turf from Scunthorpe and the seating from Luton and the wetland planting from Norfolk. And that was so important to building that great sense of national excitement. And the final point, managing the possible impact of the general election. Well, that really touches on what I think was sort of politically one of the most important things, which was, which I think actually Ken and I were very good at, was managing cross-party and building this cross-party platform as the pre-essential stability for the whole project. And it became very clear to me early on when we were having, a hell of a row about the budget and negotiating the budget, and my God, was that heavy lifting. And it was clear that unless we agreed a set of working relationships with the opposition that meant that they saw all the figures, that we got all the figures out to the press on a quarterly basis and kind of bored them with the transparency, we were going to have an endless problem with this. And actually, it was much, much more constructive than that sort of default protection. And it was also a very important part, as loads of the feedback that I got during the Games suggested, it was a very, very important part of building this sense of government, of, whether Labour government, coalition government, holding this incredible event in trust for the people of our country. And so there we are.
Tessa, thank you very much. So as Jackie knows, we've been trying for a couple of weeks to get hold of what I thought was actually the moment that London 2012 came alive for me, which was an event slightly bizarre at Clifford Chance, which is where LOCOG and ODA had some offices, which is an absolutely superb video that was shown in Singapore, which showed London as you've never seen it before. And I finally found this video, but only at 5:45, otherwise we'd have shown it while we were waiting for the speakers. But I have tweeted it out, which actually made you think we can do this phenomenally well. And what was really interesting, I thought, and coming on to Jackie, was the way in which the London that you saw in that video and that concept actually translated into what the Games really felt like here. And I think the mastermind behind a lot of that is Jackie Brock-Doyle. Jackie.
Thank you. Hello. I'm not going to stand up because the battery for this thing is on the table. It's be dangling. I have no pockets. I came onto the project in May 2003. Actually, it was Tessa's fault. So after doing some work with Tessa and her department in Manchester on the Commonwealth Games, I was asked to come on board to see whether we could put together a communication strategy that consisted of the BOA, government, Mayor of London, and that would kind of embrace, as Ken talked about, the hiring of the bid chairman, Barbara Cassani. So I said yes, and I did that and came on board. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the importance of vision. It's a passion of mine, and I think it has to sit, a successful vision, at the centre of almost any organisation, and certainly any communications programme and marketing programme. So back in 2003, the three things that make a vision really, really good. One is clarity of message, and I remember, and actually it's brilliant that both Ken and Tessa have said these things, so we're not, clear. It shows really well how clear everything was. Ken said at the very beginning, and everybody, the Mayor of London was, this needed to regenerate the East End of London, and it needed to produce the infrastructure that London wanted. Ken, absolutely crystal clear that that was what the core part of his interest in the bid was all about. Tessa and government, really clear, this was not just about London, it had to be UK-wide. Again, absolutely crystal clear. The BOA, which is the other stakeholder in this, was absolutely crystal clear that it had to have athletes at heart, and we had to deliver a games that made the athletes perform brilliantly. So from where I was sitting, it was fascinating because so few organisations, certainly new ones, can be that clear about what they want to do. So it really helped put together what the core vision was. And I went back to the bid book, knowing I was coming here, to have a look at the 4 themes that we actually put in that bid book. And they are delivering the experience of a lifetime for the athletes who are going to compete, leaving a legacy for sport across Britain, not just in London, benefiting the community of London through regeneration, and then supporting the IOC and the Olympic movement and taking the whole movement forward. So those were the 4 things we put in that bid book. And as Tessa said, none of this is by accident, it is by design. So having that clarity, when we went through the bid, and Ken talked a bit about this at the beginning, we were very clear about how we were going to do it. That bit was fine. And actually the how was the bid book, how we were going to do it, where we were going to stage the games. All of that, as Ken said, was sort of worked out in the earlier years before we actually started work on the actual bid book. The thing that we really needed to spend some time working on is the why. So why do we want it, and why should London get it? And that really was the core of putting together the vision that we ended up delivering right through the games. And those 2 questions should sit at the heart of any type of operation or vision that you have. How do you do it, and why are you doing it? Because until you can get underneath the why, actually, you can never be really sure that you can carry everybody with you. And it moves on to the second of the sort of 3 C's. So clarity, vital. Connection, really important. And the why enabled us, all of us, to connect with the people we needed to connect. It allowed us to connect with the IOC members during the bid, and at the end of the day, 51% of the people needed to vote for us. And, we only just got across the line. We should always remember there's only 4 votes that got us across the line. But we had to connect. So the why really helped us to, and the vision really helped us to connect with the IOC. It helped, as Ken said, with connecting with London, and obviously the Walnut Whip was vital in making people actually understand a figure. And we all know the public don't understand percentages, they don't understand anything that consists of more than 6 figures. Everybody knows that from their research, but actually being able to connect with people, really, really vital. And then being able to connect with the UK. Again, the big project we did all through the bid was getting the whole of the UK to back the bid. We set up the Nations and Regions group, and as Tess said, one of the unsung heroes in the whole thing. They were absolutely phenomenal in making their regions and their areas own it. And these were people who had other jobs. I mean, they didn't have the luxury of just sitting here working for the Games. They actually had other jobs, but they believed in the vision and what we wanted to try and do, and believed it would help the country. And then the 3rd C is consistency. And it was, we never deviated, even after we won, from really the core themes of what we wanted to deliver. So once we had that clarity, we'd connected, actually it was about not changing it. And when you go through various elections, whether it's a mayoral election or government elections, people do want to change things. They always want to tinker, and they always want to change. And it is really, really important. And I've worked on other games, as we mentioned earlier, and it's so you can see how, as you move forward with the delivery of an Olympic Games. People come on board and they want to change this and they want to change that, and it's really, really easy to give in. Never, ever give in. If you've got a clear vision and you've connected with the country, and I think we all remember the day we won the bid and how the country felt, then you have to stick with it. Doesn't mean you can't be slightly more flexible in how you deliver it, but you have to stick with it. And I know there are some copies of it, and I'm really happy to send it to you, but after we won, we took everything we believed in, and we sat, and it was a project. I mean, a number of people in this room were involved. I mean, Nikki, I know you were, where we sat down and we looked at what we wanted the vision to deliver. Now, obviously, the following day, it was, you know, horrendous for London, 7/7. But the thing that we all learnt, I think, from those two moments was that there was a even greater definition in what it was that we wanted to deliver and how it could really change people in this country. So we put together a vision that was a Games for everyone, and it was a vision that was one line, which was to use the power of the Games to inspire lasting change. And we set out within that vision what we meant by that. So again, absolute clarity. It's sat on one piece of paper. I'm a big one piece of paper person. And it explained exactly what that change was. It was about people's lives. It was about sport participation. It was about attitudes to disability. It was about communities across London, particularly East London, feeling engaged. And then to realise that quite simple, straightforward vision, we then went through 3 core elements that we needed to deliver. One was the memorable games that provided kind of experiences of a lifetime. We explained what that meant. We went through exactly what we meant by that. The other was to capture the imagination of young people all over the world. And third was to create physical, social, economic and sporting legacies that would meet the long-term needs of people and their communities. And we wrote this out, we agreed it across the project, all stakeholders, I think it was in 2006, very early on in 2006. And then the communication and marketing strategy for the Games was absolutely pinned to this. So everything we did, we sat looking at those measures or looking at the things we wanted to deliver, and we sort of stood by them. So some of the stats, just to kind of wrap up, that would be useful, I just think would be good. We said that we wanted the Games to be more than sport. Well, the London 2012 Festival, 19.5 million people joined into that. We said it had to be about young people in schools. 85% of schools in this country actually signed up to the Get Set programme and actually created and were involved in the values of the Olympics. We said it needed to be more than 6 weeks, it had to be 4 years. The Cultural Olympiad and the Inspire programmes that we worked tirelessly to deliver, 10 million people created projects, 78% of them are going to continue after the Games, so an amazing impact right across the country. Tessa talked about the benefits for businesses right around the UK. With ODA and LOCOG, over £7 billion worth of contracts were awarded for the Games. Many of them, well, most of them, 98% of them, were across this country contributing to it. We said we wanted to capture the imagination of young people all over the world. The latest survey we did after the Games, 70% of the population said their children are now more positive about sport than they were before the Games. And we also delivered the Inspire project, International Inspiration, which was 12 million children in 20 countries have now participated in sport that's relevant to them and their communities. Very important, not just anything. And then the physical legacy. Ken talked about that. I'm not going to elaborate because he said it so beautifully at the beginning, but it's there for people to see, and as Ken said, it's just the beginning. That was really just a kind of, start-up, and the rest of the regeneration and transformations there. Structure and sport, probably that was the one thing that became political through the 7 years as different projects came on board and different governments did different things with it. I think everybody believed fundamentally in the need to deliver and develop programs for participation and develop programs for elite sport. The actual how that was done across both different governments, that was different. And then attitudinal and social, which has been also amazing. 85% of people who watched the Games on television, and just so you know, 91% of this country watched the Olympic Games, or 15 minutes of the Olympic Games. 70% of this country watched some of the Paralympic Games, so massive. But 85% of the BBC audiences said and agreed that the Games helped bring the nation together. So in terms of an attitudinal change, that really was a milestone. And 1 in 3 UK adults have said the Paralympic Games have changed their attitudes towards people with disability. And again, not by chance, we have all these stats, because all of the research we did was, again, put against the vision that we bought into at the very, very beginning. And everything we did around marketing and communication stuck to this. It's also, again, as I said, it's a bit of a passion of mine and vision, but it really helped make some decisions that we had to make within the organising committee. I mean, this, not to forget that this country, when we won the Games, things like Twitter didn't exist. So actually changing how you communicate, massive. The global economic climate in the world just crashed and burned shortly after we won. We didn't go into that bid thinking that we were going to have huge amounts of issues with raising money or the impact it had, obviously, on also the work the ODA did. But it allowed us, having a strong vision where everybody is very clear about what guides you as an organisation or as a project, made it so much easier for us to look at it and say, well, does it really deliver these things? Does it deliver them? If it does, great. If not, you don't need to do this. And so it does become a good way to make, and a simpler way to make decisions. That's all I was going to say, really, about the vision.
Brilliant. I think this is the first time actually we've had spontaneous applause for speakers after they've spoken as opposed to at the end of the event. We're going to now do a very quick fire question and answer. Jackie has to go at 7. I know that Tessa and Ken may be under diary pressure too. So if you can keep your questions really, really short. We're also being very productive because Kerry is the only person in charge of the microphones this evening. So just say who you are and very quick questions. So anyone want to go first? Yes, right next to Kerry at the back.
Hi there, good evening. I was quite inspired by the Olympics and the Games and how they developed. I myself used to be involved in the athletics as a youngster. I just wanted to find out from yourselves, although you said the plans were, years ahead, and you had to prepare yourself, how do you think that's also going to affect us in a negative light in terms of financially, in terms of the public, as we're saying, paying and fitting the bill for these things that have occurred?
Okay, another quick question? We'll take them in twos. Yes, right at the front.
Sue Street, is there anything you would have done differently?
Okay, let's just do those two very quickly.
Not really. I think, as I said, watching Craig Reedy put the gold medal over Jessica Ennis, I just thought, I got everything I wanted for London out these games. He got everything he wanted. It's very difficult to think of such a vast project that has so. I mean, it gave us more than we actually expected at the end of the day. The lesson from it, though, is as Tess was touching on. Once we came back from Singapore, we really spent the best part of the year locking down, because we hadn't integrated the Westfield development because that wasn't certain to go ahead. We had to make some changes. Once we'd agreed that plan, it wasn't then changed. What kills every project is somebody, usually after a change of power at an election, come and say, we'd like to make this change. Immediately the architect's costs take it through the bloody roof. So it is largely what we set out back in 2005-06.
Any more comments? Anything that you'd have done differently? What are we going to think about in the longer term?
I wish we'd made it harder for the school sport legacy to be just dismantled as it has been.
Jackie, any regrets?
No, definitely no regrets. Look, I'm in communications. You always wish the media would write what you want them to write every single time. But no, I mean, we, all the way through the project, 80% of the coverage was positive. We always just focused on the negatives. But no, I don't think we would change anything. I think we had such a clear vision at the beginning, and it was so clearly delivered at the end.
Jill, can I just add to Jackie's point about this point about consistency, deciding what you're going to do and nailing it down was an absolute prerequisite within government from the outset, and not allowing the Treasury particularly to meddle around with scope once we determined what the scope was going to be. So that was also, I think, a very important part of the discipline that with the Olympic executive we were able to achieve. Wouldn't have come in, it's come in under budget, by the way.
That's today's story. Final budget. Final budget. Not the
Well,
first budget. Would you like to issue a clarification on the
yeah.
budget?
I mean, it's often said, oh, but the budget went up 4 times. I made absolutely clear that if we won the games, when you bid for a games, you put in an indicative bid. We had not been able to do any kind of analysis of this derelict wasteland that we were then going to develop, nor had we costed the scale of our ambition. And you could perfectly well have done an Olympic Games in terms of constructing the venues for 2.4 billion. You would have had a flat pack games that you would have put on top of contaminated soil. You'd have taken them down at the end, and that would have been it. But we decided that we were going to regenerate this filthy part of East London, and that was what we did. And we regenerated it to such a degree that you could build. There's one bit of the Olympic Park where you couldn't build family housing. Anywhere else, you could build family housing because the extent of contamination, decontamination, was so profound. And remember, of that 9.3, well, actually of the 7 billion, 75p in every pound was spent on regeneration, not on building venues and everything else for the Olympics. But I always said we would have to review the budget. And of course, the 2 big budget hikes, one that the delivery authority was liable for VAT, which was not clear and could not be clear from the outset because it wasn't sufficiently aligned to being a local authority, which would have exempted it. So that was something that we had to that we had to consider. And the second was a £2.7 billion contingency.
Could I add one thing as well? When we put in the bid, if you put in a fully costed bid, you'd have had to spend most probably 150, 200 million pounds on site and doing really detailed work. The odds were so long at that stage, people would have gone mad.
Yeah.
That was a real cheapo bid. And we put in, it was still 4.2. As I say, we massively expanded the legacy, and the government was very far-sighted about all that. But I remember on the night we won, just as we sat down to sign the contract, Jack Roll said, enjoy tomorrow's papers because you'll have 7 years of doom and gloom until it starts, and then they'll say it's wonderful. And this has happened with every bloody game.
Okay, let's go to some more questions.
Pam Alexander. I chaired the South East Partnership as part of Local Orgs Nations and Regions Group. And I think it was really important to get that message about what else has been gained, because doom and gloom will go on about costs when we've all recovered from the ecstasy. And I think it really did exceed everyone's expectations across the whole of the UK. One bit which I think there was a lot of scepticism about was the economic benefits beyond London. And I think Compete For was a hugely impressive procurement tool to get small businesses, not just big businesses, economic benefit from the Games. I've always been deeply frustrated that no government has been willing to build on Compete For. And with the dismantlement of the Business Links setup, it's much more difficult for small companies to access public procurement. So I just wonder if there's anything that we could do to make that legacy a bit more real than it otherwise will be.
Yeah, get change of government.
Neither
building
government supported rather than Compete For us.
It also, the principle that when you have that amount of public money being invested, you make every public pound work very hard. And we did mandate the last, and actually LOCOG did as well, we mandated a very substantial part of the contractual investment so that businesses going for those contracts had to show that they were taking on apprentices.
Okay, Jackie's got to go. So any burning question for Jackie?
I've got a question. My name's Katie Krelitz. I've heard and spoken with people involved in the sponsorship of the Olympics, and for them a big focus was making sure they got equal sponsorship for the Paralympics and the normal Olympics. I was just wondering your experience as far as putting focus on the Paralympics more so than hadn't happened in previous games.
Jackie, I was going to ask you another question. Somebody remarked to us that they weren't sure that, given the focus, the sort of slightly negative focus on some of the sponsors, whether you would actually get those sort of big companies in a developed country, so not in Brazil, but those certain countries developed, whether they'd be so willing to sort of expose themselves. You're on Atos or whatever. Are you willing to sort of go, you pay a lot, and then you're sort of dragged through
Well, Atos signed up for the next 4 games, so
oh,
I should
right,
imagine
okay,
they
so
probably are. I mean, on sponsors, I think that's a really good question. Top sponsors, there are 3 ranges of sponsors. The top, which actually are signed up by the International Olympic Committee, and they include Coke, McDonald's, Visa, Atos, P&G, and lots of others. Then the tier 1 sponsors, which the Organising Committee can get on board to help fund the staging of the games, and they need to be in non-competing industries, obviously, than the tops. And then you have a range of sort of tier 2, 3 suppliers that sit below that. Actually, with the tier 1, the UK domestic sponsors, they all came in. We sold those rights based on the Olympic and the Paralympic Games together. Top sponsors, we actually had to do a really, really hard piece of work to get the top sponsors to support the Paralympic Games, because most of them never do. So we did a huge amount of work to get them to support that. The Paralympic Games, they've never, ever held a Paralympic Games in an environment like this. It's not just about the sponsors. I mean, we had some amazing city look that had the agitos as opposed to the Olympic rings out there. The venue's full from the very beginning. I mean, Paralympic athletics has never ever had morning sessions full. The Olympic morning sessions have never been full, let alone the Paralympic Games. So this was a massive game changer for the Paralympic movement, and it should be. It should be a game changer because we invented them in this country, the Paralympic Games, so it should have been a game changer. And it was, not just for sport, but it was for people's attitudes to disability, off the scale change. And you know, I know Tanny Gray-Thompson is really driving through some quite important measures for disability or children in schools and equal access to to disability sport. And I think she's going to do really well on it, because I think this country really woke up to people with disabilities, and I think it will change their lives forever. But the sponsors help. I mean, I just should say that, the Paralympic World Cup, sponsored by BT, huge sponsors. The great thing about sponsors, there's a lot of talk about the sponsors. I think most of them, in fact all of them, would have had a really, really positive experience. There's a lot of problems trying to support the sponsors and make sure that you protect their rights, and we had lots of sort of issues around nations and regions, but it's important. They're putting the money in, they need to get something out. But without them, you don't have the reach. You never have that type of reach. And the programs that they put together on disability, on school sport, Lloyd's and school sport, absolutely phenomenal. And without them, we would never have reached the number of people around this country that we managed to reach. We wouldn't have had a torch relay for a start, because it's completely sponsored by them. It's completely paid for by sponsors.
Tessa, you want to come in on
No,
sponsors?
those, as Jackie said, those what are called activation programs are incredibly important. I think there was also quite a lot of vigilance about the behaviour of sponsors as well, and in all the stuff about tickets and all the rest of it, a lot of which was just half-baked. The position of sponsors both had to be respected, but also a lot was asked of them. And I was very struck by the extent to which certainly the majority of sponsors responded to public attitude and the heightened public expectation that they would behave differently. And there was no public appetite for pictures of corporate, lavish corporate hospitality and so forth. And so significant numbers of sponsors actually gave their tickets away. I mean, one sponsor I know ran, all their tickets went to their workforce who were nominated because they were active in their community where they lived. Now, this is not behaviour that, I mean, it may seem like an obvious thing to do, but this is not the kind of behaviour of Olympic sponsors ever before. And what they did do was respond to the whole national expectation about this. And it took quite a while for people to understand that there were no free tickets. Everybody was paying for their tickets, and the tickets were being allocated on a fair basis through a lottery. And you know, I think again that sense of this, but you know, eventually people did believe it was fair. And I think that was very important in setting this national mood. But the interaction of sponsors with the national mood was something you shouldn't underestimate the importance of, I don't think.
Particularly where were your sponsors? Do you regard them as necessary evil or?
Well, I think for the IOC top brand, Coca-Cola and McDonald's, I mean, quite a bit of advice here. So I think it's worth scaling down the Olympics and having some healthier sponsors, quite frankly. I think the British sponsors are very good, and one of the, whether it was by luck or foresight, I mean, the British sponsors were all signed up before the banking crisis, thank God.
Exactly.
And they weren't allowed to wriggle out of it. But no, I mean, the IOC's got a problem with some of their sponsors. I don't think we really had. And another factor to add in all this, which I recall, is then that, I mean, if we hadn't had that £2 billion being spent each year, and it broadly started at the time of the banking crisis, the recession would have been very much deeper and more painful, particularly here in London. And the other thing is, for what must be the biggest engineering project in Europe, certainly in 30 years, not a single loss of life because we gave that attention to detail. It's inconceivable. That went by with not a single loss of life on such a massive project.
That was because at the outset we negotiated those principles with the TUC, and all the trade unions bought into that, and the ODA was the intelligent client negotiating those terms with the contractor.
I just thought of one of the reasons for all this. I mean, Tessa and I were both elected to borough councils in London in 1971 and spent, both of us were involved on housing. Both of us had so much experience projects that had gone wrong. And both of us are quite nerdy about detail. This helped, I think. We had some disasters of housing projects going massively over budget and massive delays.
Yes, you.
Yeah, it's, my name's Patrick Edwards. Actually, for 4 years, I was the Director of Communications for the London Thames Gateway Development Corporation, which is the urban development corporation responsible for the regeneration of the Olympic Fringe. And I suppose my first question is really to ask actually what the next 25 years should be in terms of regeneration in East London. What will it look like? I mean, there were and have been concerns about cliff edging around the Olympic Park area. What should the expectations for people in London Riverside, in Barking and Dagenham, in Havering be? You know, there was massive skills gaps in that part of town. We know there's huge educational deficits too as well. I mean, can we really sort of nail down and talk about what we mean in real terms as far as regeneration in East London will look like as a result of this investment? My second question, though, is about infrastructure itself. This was an infrastructure project. Now, you wouldn't think we were talking about infrastructure projects in the way that people are being very passionate and in invoking what it was all about, and the way that it almost seems to wrap into and tell something like a national story, if you like, of bringing people together from nations and regions. And obviously, it's not, it's relevant because the government have now belatedly come to a recognition that infrastructure needs to be looked at and have tried to get some of the magic from the ODA in pulling over Locog, sorry, in pulling over to run to lead on infrastructure. So I wondered, what lessons do you think this project has in terms of infrastructure delivery that you think are lessons that should be taken on board in bringing forward infrastructure projects in government in future?
Well, until the election of Mrs. Thatcher, annually Britain invested 5% of its GDP in public sector investment. It was then cut to 1%. And we've never really covered that. One of the problems we found was with the the best part of 2 decades having gone by without a continuing programme of public sector investment. We didn't have this. We had to bring in David Higgins to build this. There's no one around that had done that. No politicians much. Quite significant. Tessa and I have a background in housing construction in local government, because very few members of Parliament coming in now have any background in either local government or business, frankly. They've all come in through this sort of, political advisor route. And that is a weakness. And if you want I think the single most significant factor in economic success is investment, public and private together. Britain dominated the 19th century because we're the first country to invest 7% of GDP. America dominated the 20th century because after its civil war, got up to 19%. West Germany led Western Europe out of World War II and caught up with America. And in its peak year, 73, it invested 25%. Japan became the second largest economy in the world on 38%. And China was doing 43% before the banking crisis and orders its banks to increase it to 46. And at the moment, Britain is limping along barely in double figures. And therefore, and America is barely in double figures. The West will continue this relative decline unless we up our level of investment. It's the single most significant thing, both public and private. And this is where we are failing. By what? What amount? Oh, you need to get back up to something like 20%. That's most probably for a mature economy. That's the sort of level that our best ever year was 1973, 20%. When you think we've got 2 million families in need of housing in Britain, what lifted us out the Great Depression in the 1930s was, actually fixed interest rate of 2% right the way through, and that laid the foundation for a lot of construction. A lot of housing was built. Our transport infrastructure is still crap. We're going to have 9 million people in London, another million within 15 years. We should be planning Crossrail 2 and Crossrail 3. When Crossrail 1 opens, there's a station at Stratford, there's a station at Exeter. So at either end of the Olympic site, including that southern bit where all the potential still is, we have 2 Crossrail stations. We've got a brownfield site capable of 50,000 jobs and 40,000 homes, 30 minutes from Heathrow, on the edge of the heart of a great world city. It is the most significant site. The Prime Minister and the Mayor should be flogging themselves around Brazil and China and India saying, you've got to do business in Europe. Here is a site where you can build, you can construct. It's the most attractive prospect anywhere in Western Europe.
Okay, let's...
Sorry, I wanted to just add something. I'm not nearly as political on it. I have to... Honestly, for me, it's quite simple. I think the thing that was quite successful about the Games was the ability to get public and private together, working together for one goal. I think that's often unachievable. I think we need to try harder to do that, because I do think private investment can really, I agree with Ken about investment. I think that's important, but doesn't always have to come from the public sector. I think that private-public was really, really important. And the other is about connection, and I talked this about the vision, about clarity, connection and consistency. Actually, a lot of infrastructure projects do not connect with real people. They just don't connect. And people run away, they walk away, they kind of think that community relations is about doing the least that you have to do. Actually, it's more than that. You have to go out and talk. During the bid, the shoe leather we went through going out, but you've got to want to do it. Yeah, exactly. And I think this is really important. This isn't I've got to do it. It's I want to do it, because actually, if these communities really understand what it is we're doing, they can come along, they can be part of it, and I don't think we do it nearly well enough. I've actually got to go, so I'm really
sorry. Buildings which are beautiful. As Richard Rogers sat on my shoulders, throughout this and said, good design is not more expensive. And each of the buildings, the venues in the Olympic Park are beautiful.
Thank you. Yes, Jackie's just about to go. So,
thanks everybody.
Thanks, Jackie. Let's just take that. Let's just take a few more questions. Yes, there.
Yeah, hello, Alistair Bennett from the Football Foundation. I understand, particularly upset that Jackie's just left actually, because the the message about clarity and vision, I fully agree with and understand. Regeneration of a great big chunk of horrible London, yes, tick, did that, very expensive, but worth it. Winning lots of medals, we can demonstrate that as well. Sporting legacy and participation, we can't say that we've achieved that until maybe, 5 years, 10 years. Local authorities are deprioritising investing in sport because of the cuts. Are we really confident that's going to happen? And how will it happen if we're closing down sports fields all over the country?
Okay, let's hold that one. Any more questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Sue Novak. I work in the Department of Health. Sustainability and sort of legacy, I know, is really important to the project, and a bit like the sporting legacy, I'm really interested in the sort of how we can capture the sort of attitudinal changes and build them into something that's sustainable and not just there for a very short space of time. And I'm wondering what's being done, and it may not be that Tessa and Ken will know, across the centre of government. I certainly haven't picked up anything
Wish we
yet
did.
in health about what's happening, to carry those things on.
I think it's a really good point. Yes.
Catherine Packer, and during a lot of the period you're talking about, I was on the board of Hackney Volunteer Centre, so quite interested in this theme of legacy, in that sort of legacy of community infrastructure as well. I think found all of us incredibly excited, but just wondering a bit if that's just gone now.
I think that's a really, really good point to end, which is we've had the sustainability legacy, where some great things were done to deliver the promise of the greenest games. We have a sporting legacy, inspire a generation, but is everybody going back to be sort of couch potatoes? And the games makers, somebody I play tennis with, who'd been a games maker at Wimbledon, said that it was the best 10 days of her life. And we see that there are quite a lot of people already now sort of suffering from post-games come down. If you already had the best 10 days of your life, then what's to look forward to? So if you were reinstated, what would you be doing to make sure that the legacy really, really will live and you actually maximise the benefits going forward?
Well, what I would do, I would immediately reinstate through a deal with the Department of Health funding for sport for children in schools, and you could do it quite cheaply, very quickly, and you have to dedicate the money. That's the first thing. All the research shows that if money for sport is not dedicated to sport, it's not spent on sport. So you've got to start, I think, with that. The second is that I think there's great scope for looking at building out participations, participation, adult activity programs and so forth, through partnership with the private sector, capitalising, for instance, on the underutilisation of gyms during downtime. I mean, most gyms are used at peak times, and then they're lots of them are very substantially empty. But I would also look at that investment in a rather different way, building on the kind of long-termism that the Olympics represented, because the best thing you can do to prevent diabetes, to prevent heart disease, is to be physically active. And so you've got to find a way in government of diverting that money. And the third thing about, it's better to have loved and lost than never loved at all, isn't it? So it's better to have been a games maker and be sad now than never to have been a games maker. And again, I think this is LOCOG research, shows that in the survey they did immediately after the games, 44% of British adults wished after the games that they had been games makers. And what I hope we can do, and I'm actually sort of, without any reason to be involved in this, getting myself involved in this, is whether we can't have a kind of annual anniversary on the 27th of July of the opening ceremony, which links to what is a rather, an organisation with a lot of potential called Join In. And so games makers, everyone who was a games maker puts on their uniform, goes to their sports club, brings a friend, and you begin to build out from that both capacity and capability but larger numbers of people who want to give their time to sport and get the... I mean, one of the things, so final lesson, I'm so sorry about this. I think that what all the conversations I had with games makers, torchbearers, you know, the just people in the park said was that actually people are prepared to give more than anyone ever asks them for. They're just not prepared to do it if the government says we're going to close down your sports club so you can take it over. You know, but there is, you know, it was extraordinary listening to talking to games makers about their stories. So I think those are three things that would be transformational and would lift the gloom immediately.
And Ken,
Well,
guaranteeing the legacy?
The most depressing thing is, of course, the complete decline in political activity around the issues of environment. I was stunned. I believed all the way right up to the Copenhagen summit that after all huffing and puffing and posturing, they'd stagger out with a deal at small hours in the morning. And the failure to do that is devastating. I remember arguing with the last Labour government, and I wanted a new Thames barrier, bigger, a little farther out to sea by mid-century. And the official line at that stage from the Department of Environment was, oh, the polar caps won't melt till the end of the century, you don't need it till then. We now know they're going to melt perhaps 23 years from now. The scale of what's happening is much faster than anyone anticipated. The feedback loops are more scary. Because in periods in the past, in Earth's history, when you've had an increase in temperature of this sort of level, it's been over tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. It hasn't happened in 200 years. Well, and feedback loops that I think are going to be a real problem. That stadium used only half the steel and concrete of a normal stadium. And it's, I mean, actually, when you compare it with Beijing, where it's almost like so covered with steel that it's like a almost oppressive statement of power. And you walk into it and everyone falls in love with it right away. It's absolutely beautiful. And the original idea about, well, the outside bit is very lightweight because we won't be keeping it. It's going to be there for the rest of our lives. So I'm very worried about the way the environmental agenda has barely been mentioned in the American presidential elections. And the tragedy is, I mean, the CBI a couple of months ago issued a statement calling on the government to massively increase investment in creating environmental jobs, and said something like a third of all the growth there has been in the private sector in the last 5 years has been in the green industries. And given the scale of how rapidly climate's going to change, there's a huge market here. High-tech, high-skilled jobs is what we should be focusing on. Then finally, on the legacy on sport, no games has ever lifted up permanently sporting activity in the host country. And I think you've got to get to kids. And if I was, you know, running Britain, I'd have the schools open from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, and kids would do physical activity 3 or 4 times a week, like we used to. And perhaps one of the reasons so many working class boys drop out of school, number 4, is that what often gave them their pride of being in a school was what they achieved on the games pitch or the track. All that's gone. And this is a disaster, both in terms of the long-term health crisis, but also you've got these schools there. They should be used all the time. The best schools do vast amounts of extra stuff. But linking with what Tessa said, half our private gyms are empty for most of the day. And they, no doubt a 10-minute walk from the nearby school, and the kids should be in there using them. I can force physical education like we used to suffer it, didn't do us any harm.
Okay, it's a very good point on which to end. Before I thank the speakers, get you to thank the speakers for another time, the next event in this series is going to be on the 13th of November, when we've heard a bit about infrastructure, and we've heard about the people who are being brought in by both the government and the opposition to advise now on infrastructure. So we have Paul, soon to be Lord Dayton, who, as Jackie was pointing out, was Chief Executive of LOCOG. We have John Armitt, who's Chair of the Olympic Delivery Authority, who's now advising Ed Balls, not Gordon Brown. I don't know how I managed to confuse the two. On infrastructure, and Jonathan Stevens, the Permanent Secretary at the Department of Culture and Media and Sport, and they're talking about delivering the games. So if you're not signed up already, it's on our website, so that's Delivering London 2012. But I'd like to take this opportunity to once more thank Tessa Jowell and Ken Livingstone for giving us a fascinating insight into the political drivers behind London 2012. So would you all thank you, and then join us for drinks outside.